A woman worth more money than I will ever see in 3 lifetimes offered $250,000 to anyone who could restore her late mother's piano to the way it sounded before. Concert pianists came. A world-renowned restoration specialist flew in from Vienna. A man who had personally tuned instruments for Carnegie Hall arrived with a case full of tools that cost more than my truck and my house put together. Every single one of them listened, adjusted, listened again, and quietly packed their things and left. And the piano just sat there in the middle of that enormous living room. Technically perfect, not one note out of tune, and somehow completely, utterly wrong. And then a beat-up piano tuner from Tulsa, Oklahoma, that would be me, walked through the front door, looked at that Steinway, and told the daughter I didn't want her money. I wanted a photograph. The whole room went very still. She didn't laugh, because something in my face must have told her I wasn't being clever, and something in my face must have told her I'd heard that piano before a long time ago, when it still belonged to the woman who'd loved it. And within about 20 minutes of that moment, that silent instrument was going to fill every corner of that house with a sound that made a grown woman sink down onto a Persian rug she could have bought a small country with, and weep like a child. Not because I am more gifted than those men. I want to be honest about that right now. I am not. But every one of them had walked in and seen an instrument, and I had walked in and remembered a person. Before I tell you about the photograph, and about what it was that made everything click into place, do me one favor first. If you've ever lost somebody and found yourself standing in a quiet room just listening for a sound that's never coming back, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel exists for the people who know exactly what that kind of quiet feels like. I'll be here when you're ready. Then let me tell you about a woman named Evelyn Marsh, and about the 11 years I spent tuning her piano. My name is Dale Whitfield. I'm 43 years old, and I tune pianos for a living, the same way my father did before me and his mother before him. My grandmother actually started it. She was a church organist in rural Arkansas who taught herself piano repair out of a library book during the Depression because there was no one else within 60 miles who could do it. By the time my dad took it over, it was a small business with a handful of loyal customers and a reputation for being the people you called when nobody else could figure out what was wrong. And by the time it came to me, it was just me, a '09 Ford F-150 with 200,000 miles on it, a case of tools worn smooth with use, and a list of clients I'd inherited the way you inherit a handshake. Slowly, with trust built up over years of showing up on time and telling the truth about what something needed. I need to tell you something important right here at the start, because without it none of what comes later makes any sense. I lost my own mother 8 months ago. I'll come back to that, because it turned out to matter in ways I never could have predicted. But I need you to hold it there in the back of your mind while I tell you the rest of this. Because everything I understood about what happened in that house, I understood the way I did, because I was still carrying a fresh loss of my own. Grief had been running its hands through everything I touched, and it turns out that sometimes grief, the worst thing in the world, quietly makes you the only person in the room who can see what nobody else can. I first met Evelyn Marsh 11 years ago on a Tuesday in October. She'd called the shop number, my dad's old number, still the same digits, and left a voicemail in a voice that sounded like a woman who had been saying exactly what she meant her entire life and had no plans to stop. She said her piano needed tuning, that she'd been through 3 other technicians in the past year, and none of them had gotten it right, and that she wasn't interested in excuses or in people who talked more than they listened. I showed up at her house on the south side of Tulsa the following Thursday morning, and she opened the door, before I'd even finished knocking, looked me over once, and said, "You're younger than I expected. Come in." Evelyn was 71 years old at that first meeting. She was small and sharp-eyed and moved through her own house the way a person moves, when every object in it has a story they could tell you. The piano was a 1947 Steinway Model S, a baby, grand, black, and it sat in her front room the way a cathedral sits in a city, like the whole neighborhood had quietly arranged itself around it. She'd had it since she was 19 years old. Her late husband had bought it for her the year they got married, working overtime for 8 months to do it, and she had played it nearly every single day since. I sat down and played a few notes, and then I understood exactly what the other technicians hadn't gotten right. A piano isn't just physics. That's what people miss. The tuning is the easy part, the math, the frequencies, the equal temperament. But a piano that's been played by the same hands for 52 years has a character to it. It has habits. It has a particular way of speaking that belongs to the person who made it speak that way. And if you tune it like a machine, you fix it and you ruin it at the same time. You make it technically correct and personally wrong. That's what they'd done to Evelyn's piano. They'd straightened something that was meant to have a lean to it. I spent 3 hours there that first day, longer than any tuning job should take. When I was done, Evelyn sat down and played a few bars of something I didn't recognize, and she stopped and her hands went still on the keys for a moment, and she said, "That's it. That's what it's supposed to sound like." I didn't charge her for the extra time because I'd been interested, genuinely interested, in the problem. She found out somehow. The following week she showed up at my shop, drove herself, at 71, in a car I'd have been nervous to parallel park, with a container of homemade peach preserves and the information that I would be her piano technician for the remainder of her natural life, and that she didn't expect to be argued with about it. She was right. I didn't argue. For 11 years after that, I drove across town twice a year to tune Evelyn's piano, and somewhere in those 22 visits, in the particular slow way that happens between certain people, we became friends. She'd have coffee waiting when I arrived. She'd play for a while after I finished tuning, not to show off, just because that was what she did, and I'd sit in the chair by the window and listen. She talked about her husband, Gerald, gone 12 years by the time I met her. She talked about her daughter, and her grandchildren, and the house she'd grown up in, and the way music had been the one constant thread running through every version of her life. She was the kind of woman who had strong opinions about everything, and was usually right about most of it, and I liked her enormously, the way you like people who don't perform for you, who are simply and completely themselves. I knew her piano the way you know a voice you've been listening to for years. I knew the particular resonance of the lower register in cold weather. I knew that the G above middle C had a slight warmth to it from 11 years of Evelyn's left hand favoring that chord. I knew the way the sustain pedal sat a quarter-inch lower than factory, because she pressed it with the ball of her foot rather than her toe, and after enough years of that, the piano had accommodated her. Evelyn died 14 months ago. Her heart, in the night. I put on a clean shirt and went to her memorial service and stood near the back and grieved quietly for a woman who had made 22 separate Tuesday mornings genuinely worth getting out of bed for. And then, 2 months after that, I lost my own mother. Those two losses did what losses do when they come close together. They braided themselves into something heavier than either one alone, and I found myself going through the motions of the job, driving to houses, opening my case, doing the work, and underneath all of it there was this low constant ache that I couldn't tune out no matter what I adjusted. Here's what nobody warns you about when someone is gone. It isn't the enormous absences that break you open. It isn't missing them at holidays or birthdays or the big markers. It's the small sounds. It's the specific, unrepeatable, entirely ordinary sounds that a person makes just by being alive and present in the world. My mother used to hum to herself while she read. Not a song exactly, just a sound, a low, contented, barely there sound that meant she was absorbed and happy. I spent the first 3 months after she died catching myself going quiet in rooms and listening for it, even knowing it was impossible. Even knowing. Grief doesn't care what you know. It goes on listening anyway. That's the thing about loss that you can only understand from the inside. You would trade almost anything, serious things, important things, things that matter, for 30 more seconds of one ordinary, unremarkable sound. The hum, the footstep, the way a person cleared their throat before they started a sentence, the small, daily, completely overlooked music of a life being lived nearby. I didn't know it yet, but those months of listening for a sound that wasn't coming back were teaching me exactly what I would need to know when Evelyn's daughter called. Her name is Lorraine. Lorraine Marsh Hadley. You may have seen her name in financial news. She runs her mother's foundation now. And before that, she built her own investment firm from the ground up starting in her late 20s. and the kind of numbers attached to her name these days are the kind that make my brain go sideways trying to hold them. None of that is how I thought of her. I thought of her as the woman Evelyn mentioned in nearly every conversation, with a particular mixture of fierce pride and mild exasperation that I've come to believe is the specific emotional frequency of mothers and daughters who are too much alike to entirely admit it. After Evelyn died, the estate settled. These things take time. Lorraine kept the house, at least for a while, and she kept the piano. Of course she did. It was the most Evelyn object in the universe. But then something happened, a small and strange and completely derailing thing. She went to sit down at it one afternoon just to hear it, I'm certain, far more than to play. And the piano sounded wrong. Not broken, not out of tune in any technical sense. Just wrong. Different. Flat in some way that had nothing to do with pitch. She brought in a technician. Then another. Then a restoration specialist who charged $400 an hour and spoke at length about soundboard deflection and string tension and hammer voicing. Then she posted, quietly at first, and then more publicly, a standing offer. $250,000 to anyone who could make the piano sound the way it had when her mother played it. The way it sounded on the recordings Lorraine had on her phone, home videos. Her mother's hands moving over the keys on a Sunday afternoon. That sound. That exact, particular, irreplaceable sound. They came. A man who had restored pianos for 3 heads of state. A woman who had trained at the conservatory in Vienna for 7 years. A technician whose waiting list for residential clients was 18 months long under normal circumstances. They arrived, they worked, they listened, they tried, and the piano kept sounding wrong. Not to any technical standard, just to Lorraine. Just to the ear of one who had grown up falling asleep to that piano through the wall of her childhood bedroom and knew in her bones what it was supposed to sound like. I only found out about any of it because a woman named Patricia, who had been Evelyn's neighbor for 20 years, and knew I'd been her technician, called me one Thursday morning and mentioned it like she was passing along a piece of local news. I had known Evelyn Marsh for 11 years, she said. Had I seen the thing Lorraine had posted? Did I know anything about why the piano might sound different? I thought about it for 2 days. I wasn't going to get involved. I told myself I wasn't the right person, that the people Lorraine had brought in were vastly more credentialed than me, that I'd be walking into something that wasn't mine to walk into. But I had tuned that piano 22 times, and I had known the woman who played it, and those 2 facts together turned out to be more than I could sit still with. I called the number in the posting on a Saturday morning. A man answered, someone who worked for Lorraine, I assumed, efficient and polite in the way that people who manage other people's lives are efficient and polite. I told him I had tuned Evelyn Marsh's piano for 11 years and I wasn't calling about the money. I said I just wanted to take a look if that was still welcome. There was a pause, and then he said he'd pass it along. Lorraine herself called me back inside an hour. The house was on the east side, in one of those neighborhoods where the houses sit back from the street behind old oak trees, and the lots are big enough to take a full minute to walk across. The living room where the piano stood had high ceilings and afternoon light, and the kind of quiet that belongs to houses that have held a lot of living. Lorraine was there when I arrived, along with 2 technicians who were still present, still puzzling over something on a laptop, and a man I recognized from a professional trade publication as one of the most respected piano restoration specialists in the country. They looked at me the way experts look at the person they didn't call. Not unkindly, exactly, just with that particular practice neutrality that means, we're too professional to say this out loud, but we are not worried about you. I didn't look at the piano when I came in. I want you to hold on to that, because it matters. Every single one of those specialists, the moment they'd walked through that door, had looked directly at the piano. That was natural. That was correct. That was what you were supposed to do. I walked in and looked at Lorraine, and I said, I'm so sorry about your mother. She was a remarkable woman. She talked about you constantly. I hope you know that. Every single time I came to tune that piano, she found a way to bring you into the conversation. Something moved across Lorraine's face. Something that had been held in place for a while loosened just slightly, because I don't think, in the weeks of technical consultation and specialist visits and diagnostic conversations, that one single person had said anything to her about her mother. as a person, as a woman who had played piano every day for 52 years and hummed while she made tea and had fierce opinions about the correct way to brew it. They had all come for the problem. I came for both. Then I asked her the question that started everything. Lorraine, when your mother sat down to play, she always had something nearby. On top of the piano, leaning against the music stand. A photograph, a particular one. Older, worn around the edges the way a photograph gets when someone has picked it up and set it down 10,000 times. Your mother and your father, I'd guess, maybe taken a long time ago. She mentioned it once, said she needed to see Gerald's face when she played. Is that photograph still around? It would probably look like nothing. The kind of thing that might have gotten set aside in the move or put in a box. Worth nothing. Just an old photograph. Lorraine looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, yes. She remembered that photograph. It was in a box somewhere, with some other things from the piano bench and the top of the instrument. Nobody had thought to keep it out. It was just an old photo. That, I said, is what I want. Not the money. I don't want the reward. I want that photograph. Please, can someone find it? One of the technicians, not unkindly, said something about how the photograph would have no effect on the instrument's acoustic properties, which was completely true. He wasn't wrong. And I told him he was absolutely right about that. But Lorraine was already asking someone to go find the box. Here is what I knew standing in that room that none of those specialists could have known, because it had nothing to do with piano restoration, and everything to do with having sat in that front room 22 times and listened. Evelyn Marsh played differently when she was right with herself. I don't know how else to say it. Every pianist does this. The emotional state of the player changes the touch, changes the weight and timing of the keys, changes the way the hammers meet the strings. But with Evelyn it was particularly pronounced. When she was anxious or distracted or troubled, her touch went a little rigid. When she was at ease, when she was in the place she needed to be in, her playing had a specific quality to it, looser in the rhythm, warmer in the tone, unhurried in a way that made the piano seem to breathe. She'd told me once, without making much of it, that she couldn't really play well unless she could see Gerald's face. The photograph sat on top of the piano always, not as a decoration, as a necessity. She'd said it the way you say something that's been true for so long it doesn't seem worth explaining. Just a fact, like the bench height or the pedal adjustment. What I understood, standing in that living room, was something none of the technicians could have diagnosed. The piano didn't sound wrong because anything had changed in the instrument. The piano sounded wrong because Lorraine was sitting down to play it, or to listen to others play it, in a room where something essential was missing. The photograph. The anchor. The thing Evelyn had needed in order to play the way she played, the way the piano sounded on every recording on Lorraine's phone. The piano was fine. The room was incomplete. They found the box. Lorraine carried it in herself and set it on the bench and opened it. And there it was. Small, maybe 4 by 6, the edges soft and slightly curved from years of being picked up and set down. Evelyn and a young man who must have been Gerald, maybe their late 20s, somewhere outside in summer light. Her face was turned slightly toward his, and she was laughing at something. The photograph had that quality old photographs sometimes have of catching a person in a moment, so particular and private, that looking at it feels like being let in somewhere. I held it for a moment. I'd seen that photograph sitting on top of the piano for 11 years without ever looking closely at it. Holding it now was something I don't have the right word for. Like hearing a song you forgot you knew. I set the photograph on top of the piano, leaning against the music stand, exactly where it had always been. Then I turned to Lorraine and said, "Will you play something?" She sat down. She hadn't played for anyone since before her mother died. I'd learned later. She put her hands on the keys and she played about 8 bars of something and then she stopped. And she sat very still. And I saw her hands tremble, just slightly, on the keys. "That's it," she said, barely above a whisper. "That's exactly what it's supposed to sound like." The room was quiet in a way that had not been quiet before. She turned around on the bench and she looked at the photograph for a long time. And then she looked at me, and then she did something I wasn't prepared for. She laughed. Not the polished, composed laugh of a woman used to being in rooms like this one. The real kind. The kind that comes up from somewhere low and catches you sideways and doesn't care what you look like. It was the photograph, she said. The whole time, it was just the photograph. Then she cried, the deep kind, not the careful public kind. She put her hand over her mouth and her shoulders came up, and she cried the way you cry when you've been holding something very tightly for a very long time and something finally quietly gives way. Because the piano sounded like her mother again. Because in seeing Gerald's face in that photograph, she'd played the way her mother played. And in playing the way her mother played, she'd heard her mother in the room. Not as a memory, as a presence. For about 30 seconds, Evelyn Marsh was right there in that house again, alive in the sound of the instrument she'd loved for 52 years. I had given her back a sound she thought was gone. After a while, Lorraine asked me why I hadn't wanted the money. Anyone else would have taken it, she said. Why would I come all this way for a photograph that wasn't even mine to keep? I sat down on the piano bench next to her, which I probably shouldn't have done and definitely did anyway, and I told her the truth. I told her about my mother, 8 months in the ground, about the way she hummed to herself while she read, low and contented, not a song exactly, just a sound that meant she was happy. I told her that I'd been going through rooms listening for it. Still, 8 months later, and that I would trade things, real things, things that mattered for 30 seconds of it. I told her that taking $250,000 to fix something that was never broken would have felt to me like standing at her mother's piano with a price tag in my hand. And I couldn't do that. Not to Evelyn. Not to her. I wanted the photograph, I told her, because I've been looking at it for 11 years and I never once really looked at it. And now that your mother is gone, I just wanted to see her face the way Gerald saw it. Laughing. In summer light. Happy. Lorraine was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You can have a copy. I'll get you a copy made." She did, and she did something else too, something I want to tell you about because it is the part of this I have thought about the most in the months since. She didn't write me a check. She knew better than that by then. What she did was call my shop, my grandmother's shop, my father's shop, my shop now, and she sent her own collection of instruments to us for service. 2 pianos, a harpsichord, something I'd never worked on before and had to do 3 hours of research to prepare for, and she told everyone in her circle, which is a circle I don't have the vocabulary to describe adequately, about the piano tuner from Tulsa who had known her mother and listened better than anyone with a credential to their name. Within 8 months, I had more work than I could schedule. A waiting list. Regular clients who drove 60, 70 miles because someone they trusted had told them to. My shop, which had been struggling in that quiet way small family businesses struggle when the world stops noticing them, was suddenly, unexpectedly, exactly fine. And my daughter, Hazel, I should tell you about Hazel. She's 9, and she came into my life at a moment when I hadn't been expecting anything good, and she is the best thing in it by a distance I can't measure. She had been with me that day, in the truck, working on a drawing she'd been carrying around for 3 weeks. She drew the same horse over and over, getting it more right each time, and she didn't say much on the drive home, just glanced over at me once and asked if the lady's piano was okay now. I told her yes. She thought about that for a while. Then, she said, "Was it hard to fix?" And I said, "No, baby. I just had to remember what the room was missing." She accepted that the way 9-year-olds accept things that make a kind of sense they can't articulate yet, and went back to her horse drawing. She'll understand it someday. I'm in no hurry. She's going to lose people she loves, because that's what life does, and it doesn't ask your permission, and it doesn't offer a receipt. And when that happens, she's going to find herself in some quiet room, listening for a sound that isn't coming back. And on that day, she will understand that what her father knew in that house wasn't a technical skill. It wasn't training or credentials or experience, though experience was part of it. It was simpler than all of that. He walked in and looked at a person before he looked at a problem. He understood that what was broken was not the instrument but the room around it, and that the room could only be right when the right things were in it. She'll have the shop when I'm done with it, if she wants it. 3 generations before me, and 1 after if there's any justice. The chain holds. The same way Evelyn's piano still holds her, every time Lorraine sits down to play. She told me she does it most Sunday afternoons. She doesn't always play much, she said. Sometimes she just sits down, puts her hands on the keys, and looks at the photograph, and listens to the house be quiet in a way that doesn't feel quite so empty anymore. There's a version of that afternoon where I take the money, where I'm just a man who solved an unusual problem and drove home $250,000 richer. I've thought about it. I won't pretend I haven't. That's a real number. That number would have changed real things. But there is no version of that afternoon where I do that and also get to be the person who sat on a piano bench next to a grieving daughter and handed her the sound of her mother back for free, the way a gift is supposed to be given, without a transaction attached to it. Those two things cannot exist in the same afternoon. I had to choose, and I chose, and I have not once in the time since wondered whether I chose wrong. I keep the copy of that photograph on the dashboard of my truck. Evelyn and Gerald in summer light, her face turned toward his, laughing. Every time I park in front of a new house and pick up my case to go in, I see it. And I remember that the job has never really been about the instrument. It has always been about the person who plays it, the person who loved it, the specific and irreplaceable and completely ordinary way a life sounds when it's being lived nearby. A whole room full of credentialed specialists walked in and listened to a piano. One worn-out piano tuner from Tulsa walked in and heard a person. And that right there, small as it sounds, was the entire distance between $250,000 and one old photograph worn soft at the edges. So let me ask you one thing before you go. Think about someone you've lost. Think about the sound. Not the big moments, not the milestones, just the sound. The everyday, completely unremarkable, gone forever sound of them just being alive in the same space as you, the hum, the footstep, the way they laughed when something caught them off guard. What is it for you? Tell me in the comments. Say their name if you want to. I will read every single one, and I would be honored to know.